Since I have the access to the atelier that apparently has absolutely everything you can ask for, I asked the dimmer to round down the edges of the 3mm wire that I had just cut for me, because I didn't want it to poke through the elastic trim that I would be later encasing it in. There really is no time for me to just keep putting this look off, so I started stuffing 3 layers of fabric into this ginormous 1.50 to 3 meter long piece of mesh. Facing a bit of an issue. I don't think I realized that I should be making this metal mesh a little bit smaller than the actual fabrics of mine, which are 150 centimeters wide. So I should have made the mesh about like 140, so that I would have good 10 centimeters of seam allowance to kind of fold it on top of each other. But now I don't really have anything even, and all that line is kind of wonky as well. So I'm thinking I'm gonna go to the atelier, sew the underwear, the finish, the organza underwear that I started, and work a little bit more on that, and come home with their metal scissors so that I could cut this down, re-stretch this finishing, which is basically just tape all around the edges, and then I'll be able to pin all the sides of my 3 layers of fabric to come to the atelier this week, have the underwear, and just finish it. Oh my god. So all of the underwear pieces are cut out. This is the back, this is double line front, a little flap, gusset, whatever it's called, and then the side pieces, which I'm going to be making an enclosed French seam with. I have stitched one side, cut it down to as tiny as possible without it ripping, and I accidentally ripped an area anyway, so I'm going to have to restitch this. But I'm going to be flipping this inside out, then inserting this elastic inside of, and then zigzagging on a tension so that when it's done, it kind of crumples into areas, which will be the side pieces of the underwear. Saturday the 13th, and I've been painting for a little bit, and I did a bunch of that background, just a tiny bit of the shoulders, so this jacket area as well. I could have just gone upstairs and painted in my bedroom, but I decided to stay downstairs, and hence all those freaking long ass wires, because I didn't want to leave my dog downstairs alone because she would feel lonely, but I'm guessing she doesn't really know that I'm here anyway. I still have a bunch of paint left over. It might not look like a lot, but this is oil paint, and that usually gets you quite far with the amount I have left over in here. So I thought that I would just go and move on to monoprinting, just because I have been thinking about something else for like a potential future project for me, and I'll show you what I'm going to be up to then. First of all, I'm going to move those wires out of the way. Then I'm going to lay down this plastic to protect the floors. I have my paint over here. My images that I'm going to be working with, I just printed out a couple of photos of dirty dishes that I've been collecting for no apparent reason, and I'm thinking that might be an idea for future projects, so we'll see. I'll do some artwork with this now. Then I have a piece of acetate, which is essentially just a piece of a binder, a folder, which I cut off. It's quite thin. Ideally, I would go for something a bit more thick yet still bendy, kind of like the wax surface that I have underneath protecting my floors, but I don't have anything like that, so I'm just working with what I've got. I'm gonna go get a roller so that I could paint the acetate sheet. I have absolutely zero clue where my paint roller is, so I'm just gonna have to deal with using a regular brush. So what you need is vinyl paper that you're gonna be printing on top of, something to protect your floor, acetate sheets, images that you're gonna be using, then paint, usually oil paints. I think they work much better than acrylics because acrylics just dry too fast and they don't work. And then like something sharp and pointy. You can use a pencil, but I find that this knitting needle works way better because you can apply pressure without actually drawing on top of. But some people really like to use pencils because they see the lines that they just traced and they just don't go over the same ones twice, which is good. And I mean, something to protect my knees obviously, but the seat's been taken, so probably I'm going to be crouching the whole time. I ended up making about 6 different versions. You can see a little bit of an indent from where my knitting needle was, and I really like the effect, but obviously you don't really see that much detail in terms of what's actually happening. It's kind of difficult to distinguish, which might be the look you're going for. It certainly wasn't what I was planning, but that's all because the acetate sheet was not exactly suitable. But I do like the effect, like kind of textured effect. It took me about like 3 days, I think, to fully dry them all, and they are with various levels of detail. Like I like the subtlety of those, but you would kind of have to know what that was before you saw what the image is, so it's a little bit too vague. And also I did a couple of reverse monoprints, which is when I tried to transfer the first image and then just pressed my white sheet of paper onto that leftover paint, which I also actually scratched following the lines left over from that tracing. So these are kind of vague as well, but might be the look you're going for, who knows. And then the final images, some of those I actually decided to go over with some pencil to add a bit more detail, so you can kind of guess what those are. But I think out of those two I prefer this one, and then out of these two I actually like both. I think the left one has the most amount of detail. I really like how the shading happens. I do like all of that, besides my very wonky tracing, but I think it's a pretty interesting idea, especially coming from what I had before, which was a lot more abstract and way less detailed. Two drastically different approaches to what you can achieve as an outcome. Both of those are from the same image, and you can see if you add a little bit of pencil or a little bit of liner on top, you will see a bit more detail. So this is a bit more recognizably banana peel. These two also have a lot more logic to what is happening. Like obviously this is way too abstract, but I mean, I kind of like it. I could use it somewhere because I'm kind of planning around this as an experimental way of achieving a print. So maybe I'll go back to this method and actually use a less perfect transfer method and use the cheap acetate sheet. So these experiments are about a year old. I decided to revisit them and print them out to explore potential different options for look number 7, which is a question mark. You've seen me make a bra and underwear set for that look, and I'm not exactly sold on how that looks altogether. It might be a little bit too naked, so I'm thinking of making this as an organza thing. I've only sketched out 2 options because this one was my favorite image, and the idea was that a person going through security check in the airport has to take off some of their clothes and then put it back on, and it happened so hastily, so everything's kind of getting crumpled up and bunched together. So that was the idea, obviously kind of a bit exaggerated because you wouldn't see your underwear taking off in the airport, right? So this is a bit of an exaggerated version, but I really like that sketch, so I decided to create it and I started making it. You've seen me try to create that ruche thing. This is just the hip side portion, so for now all I have done is just this top section. So the skirt will be a little bit longer, might be even past the knees, so we'll see how I like it in the end, but this is going to be just a sample because you obviously see how hastily and fast everything is made, so it would not be the final thing, I don't think, at least. In my attempts to collect every piece of fabric the atelier produces, I have managed to collect a whole bunch of silk scraps, so I made a top out of them. When pinning the edges together, I added a layer of spider net, which would at least ensure that I have 2 layers of fabric connected with each other. Spider net is a gluey substance activated by ironing, so I did just that, ironed the whole thing all together and then started sewing it. It was quite a wrestling match, as you can imagine, because there were 12 meters of stuff to push around, so it was quite difficult, especially like knocking all the stuff over. So I tried to push everything away, and my dad actually replaced the positioning of the lamp, so it was a lot better. At some point I just decided to unwind and paint a little bit. I always have the exact same subject for the portrait, so there's nothing really else to expect. This is actually a new sketchbook. I do have a portion of my old one filmed, so if you're interested, go check out the top right corner or the link below.